Alright guys, going to do that good old topic of RAW versus JPEG, but instead of sitting here and talking to you about it, we're going to jump into Photoshop right now and do show and tell. Okay, so straight up I've got these really nice sunrise shots here, and as you can see this is the RAW file and this is the JPEG. So shot with auto white balance at 72 DPI, just standard sort of things, and I've got my picture style set as standard. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select both these files and just double click and open them up. So the RAW file is going to open up in Camera Raw and the JPEG is going to go straight into Photoshop. So to be fair, what we're going to do, going to hold down the Shift key and open this up straight into Photoshop. It's not going to do any editing to it whatsoever. Okay, so straight up, if we look at our files, our JPEG is opened up as an 8-bit file and our RAW file is opened up as 16-bit. So the big difference here is in the 8-bit environment, you only got 256 levels of color and tone that you can basically edit your image in that space. Where with a 16-bit file, you got over 65,000 levels of color and tone width. So as you're editing your image and making adjustments and doing curves and things, you'll find that in an 8-bit environment, you just don't have the flexibility and the range to edit your image to the level that it might need. Where in a 16-bit environment, you have that and the chances of making your images banned and have problems is way less reduced. Again, 256 tones and colors compared to 65,000. And your 16-bit file, your RAW file, when it opens up into that, might not even take up the whole working space, but you have that availability to actually edit in a 16-bit environment. So the next thing we're going to look at quickly here is I'm just going to add levels to each one of these. So when you're shooting and you're looking at the rear screen, you've got to realize that it's a JPEG preview. So your histogram is based on this JPEG that you see here, not based on this wonderful RAW file that you got here. So as you're shooting and you're just basically adding a third stop of extra exposure into your image, and you just start to introduce clipping and you think, oh, maybe I haven't, I better reduce back. No. Like that's the perfect way to expose to the right with the JPEG preview histogram is just as you introduce clipping, that's probably where your image is perfectly exposed and you've pushed it as far right as you can. Or what you might find, and this just comes down to your own personal testing, is once you introduce clipping with that 1/3 stop, grab another one. Because at 1/3 of a stop, you can see we've just got here and you just introduce clipping where you could probably push that another 2/3 of a stop and then use the power of your RAW file to really capture some of that highlight information because it's probably not really clipped. And with an image like this here, you might find it's just your red channel just ever so slightly clipping. So again, RAW versus JPEG. Like JPEG is dumping information. You don't have as much detail here in the shadows, which we'll see later, compared to the RAW file. So what is, I'm just going to delete this curve. I'm just going to right click, convert the JPEG to a smart object. I'm going to come back into our RAW file. I'm going to delete that. And now we're going to edit our RAW file just as what we would as any part of a normal workflow. First things first, let's change our optics. Remove chromatic aberration, profile lens corrections. Our white balance isn't embedded. It's not part of our image, but we can set it. Just going to increase it ever so slightly. Now my picture profile says Adobe Color, but we shot this on standard. But then you can go landscape because your picture style isn't embedded as part of your RAW file. It's only embedded as part of your JPEG. So we're going to come in, I'm going to recapture some highlights. I'll do 50 and I'll do plus 50 in the shadows. I just want to try and balance this, knowing that I'm going to try and get the JPEG to try and balance it as well. I'm going to add probably a little bit of dehaze, play +5, and increase the vibrancy, say +15. And let's leave it at that, click OK. Now let's come over to our JPEG. As a smart object, we're going to come into Filter, Camera Raw Filter. Okay, let's do our optics. Okay, so we don't have the optics option as the JPEG in Camera Raw, so we can't just one click and remove chromatic aberration. We can't one click and apply our lens profiles to this image, so we're stuck. Let's look at our color profile. Again, we've got no options. because as part of the JPEG, the picture style is embedded as part of the image. So, okay, that's the problem. Our white balance. Okay, so our white balance is basically, we've got a temperature slider here, but our white balance at the time of shooting has been embedded into this image. So if I had it set incorrectly like that, that would be the color cast that I'd have in this image, and then I've got to try and re-edit it out. So if you are shooting JPEG, sometimes it's probably best to shoot auto white balance, so then the camera will be as close as it can possibly be without you totally ballsing it up, and you're going to have a severe cast in your image that you've got to try and then re-edit out. So we'll do +3 here. Again, let's do our shadow and highlights. Let's do 50 and open up 50. A little bit of dehaze like we did before. Vibrancy at 15 just to match. Let's click OK and let's compare the results. So JPEG, RAW file. So you can see there's quite a big difference there. This image is far warmer. So just to try and bring the JPEG to the point of the RAW file, we've got to do probably a number of things. Again, we don't have the tonal range. So let's come in and let's apply, say, like a mid-tone mask, just to try and get some balance. Let's try and do a darks mask, say maybe just a darks 2, just to try and lift that out. Okay, so let's just have a little quick inspection. Let's come down and just look at our shadows. How's our shadows looking here? Again, we've got really smooth tonal range here in our RAW file, in our shadows, where with our JPEG, you can see we've got this looking all chunky. It's not looking great at all. And like, in all fairness, like when we did the darks adjustment, I didn't give it like an unfair hit. I just basically wanted to lift my shadows. So I used a luminosity mask, which is to identify exactly what you need adjusting. And it's got these effects. And like, you could probably come in and fix this up, but you got to then run like noise filters over it, or even worse, use a third-party plugin that you've spent a couple of $100s on to fix a problem like this that never even had to exist if you shot in RAW. So if we just come in now, got to do like maybe a color balance as well. Color balance, look at highlights, add some yellow, just try and maybe the cyan and the pinks, just to try and bring it back. Then come in, do a vibrancy mask, and this is all the stuff that needs doing just to try and say, can you please just be like the RAW file? Come in, hue saturation. Check for that to that. So like we're getting there. We're getting there. And again, but the problem is though is that this is a JPEG. Again, like if we come in, look at our image size, it's only 72 dpi, where with our RAW file here, it's 300 dpi. So we've instantly got at 200% the resolution. Comparable difference between the two. So when you are looking at the RAW versus JPEG, your JPEG will save out as a JPEG. Sure, you can save it as a TIFF file or a PSD, but at the end of the day, it's not that. It's like putting lipstick on a pig. It's still a pig. Where with your RAW file, it's a TIFF file or it's a PSD or it's a JPEG, but it's because it's at the top of its pyramid. It can be all these things where a JPEG is at the bottom and it can't be these other things. And that's the whole reason why JPEG versus camera RAW exists, because one will always be supreme to the other. And a JPEG does have its place. Like I think a JPEG, when you're shooting RAW plus JPEG in a camera situation, would be as if you needed those JPEGs quickly to throw off to a client, set your JPEG quality as like small, just so they can preview it and say, I'll have those 10 images out of the 200, and then you go and edit those 10 RAW files. That's just my perspective as a landscape photographer who's done commercial shooting as well. That's the reason why I've shot RAW plus JPEG, was purely for that reason. But the good thing is that you've always got your RAW file, your digital negative. You don't have a JPEG, which is already a processed image at the end. And if you wanted to find out more about editing your images, I'll leave a couple of links to tutorials here. Again, guys, thanks for watching. Give us a like, subscribe to the channel, and as always, I'll see you in the next tutorial.